Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel for the International Conference on Abuse. My name is Ray. I oversee youth engagement at UNA USA, and I'm so excited to be joined by a few of our UNA USA Global Goals ambassadors. So before we dive into today's panel, I'm first going to hand it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their SDG and how that relates to today's topic of human trafficking and ending gender-based violence. So maybe Eileen, we can start with you.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you for your kind introduction. Hi, everyone. I am Eileen Dawn, and I am here to represent SDG 16. And I am a trailblazer combating gender-based violence and human trafficking. And I am the founder and executive director of Hope Picks Global. I have done a TED Talk, and I have recently published my book. My background is a little bit diverse. I have worked with DOJ, ICE, and FBI on human trafficking and money laundering cases. But by trade, I say used to be a petroleum engineer and NASA scholar and supply chain executive, which we might be, covering later on regarding this topic. And I wanted to touch upon, the reason why I chose to represent the SDG 16, because SDG 16, if you don't already know, is for peace, justice, and strong institutions. That really means to promote the peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, to provide access to justice for all, and build effective and accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. And if you don't already know, regardless of it might not have human trafficking in the goal itself, if you dive in deeper into the goal details, 16.2 talks about protect children from abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and violence. That is exactly what we're talking about, to end abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against and torture of children. And 16B talks about strengthening national institutions to prevent violence and combat terrorism and crime. And the list goes on and on. And I will let my colleagues dive in. I know that Paul is also representing SDG 16, but he has his own perspective as well. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Eileen. And maybe Paul, you can go next.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. It's hard to follow up Eileen on any panel with all the wonderful things she's doing for gender-based violence, and then being a strong survivor and giving her story at every opportunity. So I appreciate it, Eileen. And it's my privilege to actually, yes, be UNA USA Global Goal Ambassador with Eileen. Very humbling. My background is I was 20 years a U.S. Army officer, special operations. So I had a lot of opportunities to work in some austere areas, Iraq, Afghanistan, also sub-Saharan Africa, Mauritania. So I was exposed to, I did a lot of medical activities in those areas, dealing with women and children, and seeing how some of those societies are very caste, very based on how much money they make, what kind of tribe they're from, and seeing people turned away that are probably most in need of care. And seeing how that plays out, where you have people that are facing stuff like various forms of genital mutilation, trafficking, and it left a big impression on me. I had an opportunity. I worked in Mali, northern Mali, with the UN in MINUSMA. Also was exposed to some of that. I had a phenomenal deputy from Niger, Aisha too, who I listened to because she's Nigerian. She was a local. No one wants to listen to a white old American guy when you're up there. They want a local. And she told me women and children were the way to do it. That's how you build society back up. And I listened and I supported that. And we did an exceptional good job there. And from that, I got a job at the UN Secretariat in Eastern Africa. I worked in Eastern Africa and Somalia and Ethiopia and Sudan, working with AU, delivering mandates for security. And I was especially keen to the human rights issues of transitioning security in those areas, and the volatility, and seeing what damage can happen to those most vulnerable populations of women and children when there's not good security in place. So that's my background. Like I said, I'm just excited to be here with Eileen and with this illustrious panel. So
Thank you, Paul. And London, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Ray. Hello, everyone. My name is London Bell, and I am a UNA USA Global Goals Ambassador for SDG 10. I am also a United Nations Fellow for African descent for the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And I am the founder and president of Bell Global Justice Institute. And we are an organization in consultative status, special consultative status with the Economic and Social Council of the UN, and our work is to promote the rights of women and girls, human rights of women and girls, and gender equity. I am a human rights lawyer. I'm specifically trained in international human rights law and international business law. I'm very passionate about the intersection of SDG 10, reduced inequalities, and combating human trafficking and gender-based violence. One of the things that I know from data and from experience myself is that discrimination within systems and against vulnerable populations exacerbate the possibility of someone being trafficked or experiencing gender-based violence. And so just some latest data from SDG 10, 1 in 6 people globally experience discrimination based on any group or any grounds. Women are more than twice as likely to report discrimination based on sex, and 1 in 3 people with disabilities report discrimination. So I think in order for us to really address human trafficking and gender-based violence from an SDG 10 perspective, we really have to work to reduce inequalities that impact those of us living within marginalized communities. And so I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you all for sharing a bit more about your background and your SDG and kind of what drew you to this conference and this panel. So I wanted to actually touch on London's last point about vulnerable populations and marginalized groups and sort of pose the question of how can we ensure that marginalized and vulnerable populations, including migrants, refugees, racial minorities, the disabled, even the LGBTQ plus community, how can we prevent those marginalized and vulnerable groups from human trafficking and better protect them from gender-based violence?
I can start, if that's okay. So yeah, and connecting it with SDG 10, I strongly believe that in order to protect marginalized and vulnerable populations from human trafficking and gender-based violence, we have to really ensure that the systems designed to protect marginalized and vulnerable communities and to bring forth justice and to combat these heinous crimes are designed through particular lenses. And so that is the lens of inclusivity, the lens of equity, the lens of intersectionality, and the lens of human rights, so, and I think in order for us to do that, there need to be people in decision-making spaces that represent or reflect the vulnerable populations that these systems are trying to protect. And that means having, folks who are living with disabilities at the table, who are working to develop policies that ensure these systems are designed equitably and intersectionally in all of the other ways that I just mentioned. And just to give you all some thoughts about how inequality, disproportionately impacts, groups of people. Bell Global Justice Institute did a report to the CERD committee in August of 2022. The CERD committee is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. And so when the US appeared before this committee to discuss its the ways that their laws and policies are fighting discrimination, what we learned as civil society is that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men experience sexual violence, physical violence, stalking, or combination of all. And then even though Black women and girls, or Black people rather, only represent 14% of the US population, Black women and girls are overrepresented in areas of gender-based violence and sexual violence. Black women can report up to as high as 45% of experiencing gender-based violence and sexual assault, more than our counterparts. We can represent as high as 40% of human trafficking victims, more than our counterparts. And part of that is because of the systems that, are designed to protect, but are not equitable, are not fighting racism and other, forms of discrimination. And so I just strongly believe that that's part of the reason why these numbers are so high. And I believe that we just need to look at root causes of these types of discrimination, looking at root causes of why migrant people, those who are migrants and refugees, are fleeing homes. We're the largest number of people fleeing their homes in the world on record right now. So looking at those root causes is one way of fighting these crimes.
Thank you so much, London. I really agree with what you have said, and I think that totally, despite that there are 17 different SDGs, and somehow we all intersect with each other, whether it's housing, whether it's education, whether it's food, whether it's equality or gender equality, and SDG 16. So I wanted to also address from what you have mentioned about the refugees and immigrants. As myself sit on different councils, including state and national councils, to serve immigrants and refugees, and sometimes non-immigrant survivors. What we found, particularly related to this SDG 11, is to recognize the need to make cities and human settlements more inclusive, safer, resilient, and sustainable. And what does that mean is really let's say there can be immigrants, and today we just had a meeting and talk about smuggling and human trafficking. And I think that a lot of people, maybe like myself, originally when I heard about human trafficking, I'll be honest, as a survivor myself, I'm like, no, I'm not a survivor, because I'm like, I wasn't smuggled. But there's so many intersections that people don't already know that they are trafficking victims because of the marginalization, because they are underserved. A few of the examples I can give is simply because of the language barrier. So how can we be inclusive and give them the equal access to justice, the equal access to language purely, and also as a person who emphasizes on the culturally sensitive, survivor-centered, and trauma-informed care, how can we be culturally sensitive? And I'm not talking about just immigrants, refugees, and or non-immigrant foreign nationals. I'm talking about within the United States. We're a melting pot. We have people from different races, from different cultures, and that's the great part about it. But when it comes to what does it look like on the ground, rescuing people, I give you an example. It's not personal. A person from the United States, let's say a Caucasian versus African American versus an African person, might respond to the law enforcement help very differently because of their experiences. I want to tag back on London. We have also that stats about the races and the gunshots and different things from the crime rates, etc. So they might simply not trust the law enforcement, and that's where our job is, where my job is. I always say that, how can we make this to fill in the gaps, to really educate them, whether it is to, to build the trust, whether it is to build a rapport, whether it's just something simple, to be there and listen to the needs for their specific and unique backgrounds from each of them, each of their culture, and to be there for them, because end of the day, we must focus on being survivor-centered so that we can really help them to get them back on their feet, whether it's mentally, whether it's physically. Thank you.
Thank you both. I feel like you touched on so many topics when answering that question. Not only is it important to have sort of a human rights centered policy, but also having adequate representation in decision making and having, the proper infrastructure in place and systems that are equitable and culturally sensitive when addressing this topic. So while we're talking about, peace and strong institutions and also justice, I wanted to actually shift gears and talk a little bit about SDG 16. This topic is obviously an international issue as well as a domestic issue and a local issue. And so, especially with UNA USA, we talk about the American context a lot, but we do encourage people to think globally about this issue and figure out how we can learn from what's going on abroad and apply it within our local communities. So I wanted to actually talk about international cooperation, especially when we think about the UN as a multilateral organization and the resolutions and policies they create to address things like gender-based violence and human trafficking. So maybe, Paul, I can turn it to you and ask, how can international cooperation and information sharing be enhanced to combat human trafficking and gender-based violence as both a domestic and international issue?
Yeah, that's not a small question, Ray, but I appreciate it. No, I can talk. I've been in London working at the UN Office of High Commission of Human Rights and the tremendous work she does as an attorney. I'll use that as a starting point. So they work very hard, do a lot of work as far as developing the laws that get passed and brought down to like a military in like a joint military, like the G5 Sahel or the Somalia African Union Mission, which I think is, I'm going to date myself and say AMISOM, but it's like AMITAMS or something now, since I was there last. But it asked them to sit there and deliver on their human rights promises. So the senior leaders from both the country and those militaries and those countries that support it sign off on that and say, yes, what London sent down, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And then in reality, they get into the field and bad things happen. And at that point, you need to hold them when you're talking about strong institutions and holding them accountable. And I'm talking sexual assault. I'm talking different types of gender-based violence without getting into the details of it. But sexual exploitation, like a lot of things that happen that come back up to the UN. But it's very hard for those offices, if there's not cooperation internationally, to hold those people accountable, not just the military on the level, but the military commanders. Even though it's written into law, you need the African Union, you need the UN, you need the US to pull in there and say, this is not tolerated. The US has a role in that. They train some of these militaries. They have an opportunity to, show them what the standard is for human rights. And I think as an American, you have to demand that we do better and that we deliver that message and we make sure that they're trained and that they know all the way up to the commander they're accountable for their actions, and that we have to come forward and say, if we're not doing that the right way, we have to come forward and be honest and forthright about it. And if we're not, we should hold those people accountable for it. And when I talk about holding them accountable, if Congress doesn't come back and their legislators don't come back to say, hey, this is happening, people are getting abused, there's sexual exploitation happening in some of these areas where we're supporting, we can't tolerate it, and we have to hold those countries accountable. They signed off on it, they agreed, we're part of that framework of the UN, we need to do it. And that applies in the United States as well. So, not being as familiar, with that process, you have to sit there. If there's things happening around you, and you see these events happening, if you're not going as a U.S. citizen and voting, if those congressmen, if those senators, if those state assembly people are not supporting financing the UN and supporting the efforts of London and other people like that, or if they're not out those countries that are doing those things or responsible for the things and signing off and not delivering on human rights, then vote them out. Hold them accountable. Say you're not doing everything you possibly can in your position representing me on Capitol Hill or in the state house to do what you can to stop gender-based violence at the highest level and to deliver on your promises on it. So that's where I see it at a high level. And I think you need to, work with your vote and just, bring it to them and tell them this is an important topic for you, that we need to stop it now and it won't be tolerated anymore.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned sort of a civic engagement piece and kind of connecting how we engage with federal government, but also how that ties into what happens on a global scale as well. I actually wanted to focus a little bit on accountability, as you were kind of talking about in terms of holding institutions accountable. But I also wanted to, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention youth and students and educational institutions and what that means for gender-based violence. So I actually wanted to pose the question to all of you as we're thinking about accountability, especially referencing things like Title IX and protecting students at schools against gender-based violence and sexual harassment and sexual assault. First part of my question is, how does this issue impact young people? And how can young people and educational institutions be a part of helping address this problem and solving these issues?
I can go with this if you would like. So I think the young people are at very high risk at this issue. For instance, online sexual exploitation. We recently did an interview with Ray on my podcast, the Miss Texas Show, and he talked about the double-edged sword with the technology, and it's totally true because on one hand, it's so great that we all are in this room, and it wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for technology today. However, because youth are so so advanced than us, like, I still don't know how to use TikTok, and I'm sure a lot of them do. And I sometimes play with a few of the social media apps, but these are also a disadvantage for the youth that put them at the vulnerable situation that they get groomed through online situation. And for instance, it can be a woman posing a man romantically to approach a youth female to pretend to admire them and to have like a romantic relationship to build the trust. That's all the grooming process with the ultimate goal to exploit them. Say, hey, can you just show me a picture of, just a little bit? And then eventually they get hold of their picture, say, I'm gonna share this on all social media. So this is what you're gonna do. I mean, this is just one of the many examples. And what I think needs to be done, Paul and Ray, you both talked on the high level, and I really would love to see with the, the SDG goals, the deadline being 2030, and I hope it will happen sooner, is to mandate education in all schools about preventing human trafficking, because you talked about Title IX office, and I'll be honest, it's kind of like a hate or love situation. Sometimes we have schools that are so supportive, like, yeah, please do come, and sometimes they're like, we invite Title IX office, they were like, we can't speak about it because we don't know how to speak about it. Well, but what do you mean? What does that, really mean to us? We're on the ground. Well, it sounds great that there's Title IX, but what does it really look like to protect the safety, the community, and the environment for our youth to be there in school? Because they're supposed to be having their time to focus on school, not having to worry about their campus safety, etc.
If I can jump in for a second and also add that as far as young people have been for centuries at the forefront of change through movements, and I think now that is still happening. And I think what we need to do is continue to support young people, guide young people, and provide those opportunities for advanced advocacy through leadership opportunities. And that goes back to ensuring that they are at the table when decisions are being made. And also, I'd like to share that social media, definitely a double-edged sword, but at the same time, it because everything is happening in real time, we can see movements happening around the world where young people are at the forefront, are actually bearing witness, documenting, and keeping all of us updated on what's happening. One of the things that I'm hearing from young people and content creators is that some information, this goes back to discrimination. There is some information from some content creators that are often shut down by different platforms. African Americans often, feel that way when they are trying to share information about issues that are impacting us in an intersectional way, indigenous communities and, other communities. So I think that advocacy also for inclusivity and that freedom of space to talk about issues on social media is important. And I think young people, again, will continue to be at the forefront of, making the world better, but we definitely need to support them in doing that.
And I'll close out, Ray. It's hard to follow Eileen in London, but it's going to consistency. So you need, and Eileen mentioned it as far as security. And making sure that if you're a youth and it's state by state in the United States, there's not as an uneven application of supporting our youth that are from different backgrounds, different areas that may be subject to bullying, sexual assault, the LGBTQIA community that feel like they're left out. And there is a lot, like London mentioned, there's a lot of lobbying. There's a lot of TikTok and pushing this to the forefront and fighting for those rights. And I'd ask them to continue to do that because we don't, every state's laws are different. Every area's laws are different. Every school district supports in a different way. But you have advocates out there like London, like Eileen, like yourself, Ray, that are willing to fight for them. And UNA and other UNA USA and other organizations like it are going to do our best job to, support that and bring that forward and bring these concerns out. And hopefully some of those laws can change and we can get more rights into the schools and hold more people accountable and get the laws and institutions on your side to support you in that battle, because they are the ones that are going to make the change. They are the ones that are going to be the future for us and make it a much more human rights focused and liberated country that we're living in.
Thank you all for that. As a follow-up on the topic of education, I did also want to ask you what your advice would be to someone who is new to this type of advocacy work, especially thinking about maybe someone in an educational space or someone who works with young people or just someone in general who maybe isn't as well versed in this topic, but wants to advocate for survivors and those who are susceptible to human trafficking and gender-based violence. What would be your piece of advice for how to best advocate for this topic?
Eileen, would you lead us in that?
Yeah, I would say be Eileen. Be Eileen. Start like Eileen. So it's all this Eileen's story. So
Yeah.
That is so kind of you. I hate to always jump on some. I wanted y'all to start first, but I guess I can share some of the resources on our organization HopePix Global, which is under my name. You can go to hopepixglobal.org. There's a list of resource guide that we compile. I think it is really helpful because we put on different stats that London was referring to, and Paul have talked about as well, that to really educate you, because sometimes we see the movie, say The Sound of Freedom. I always hear the controversies, but I always say that for me it is about us collaborating. I think it did a great job educating people about what is happening, but a lot of people have the misconception that it is happening overseas. So what does it really look like? And I can tell you all about it. And when I speak and I'll talk to you, I'll tell you, say, you know what, I'm in Houston, Texas, and there was this woman who trafficked trafficked her own daughter to the north side of Houston, and guess how much she's selling? And I'm not kidding, this is the real story, and they will understand. But if you're just like someone never heard about, you're just Googling, well, I would say Google the National Human Trafficking Hotline, and they put out the annual report by the nation, by the state, so it will give you a really good idea. Polaris does a great job of that as well. And I always say there's, the intersection. People London mentioned about people of color, and Paul mentioned about LGBTQIA community, and all those vulnerable communities, the immigrants, the non-immigrant, foreign nationals, refugees. This is a human rights issue. This is a health issue. This is an educational issue, and all of the above. But how can we really fight this is to educate ourselves, equip ourselves. So go to those websites. It intersects with sexual assault. So go to the National Sexual Assault RAINN, RAINN.org, which is also on the resource guide, and go to the domestic violence hotline, because people, they say, it takes 7 times for a domestic violence abuse survivor to get out of the situation, and coincidentally, it takes 7 times for a human trafficking survivor to get out. And a lot of the people from the outside, I have been in that boat before, so I can tell you it's not easy, because they manipulate you. That's what is the grooming process, the power and control. So your brain get all messed up. It's not like, they are stupid or anything, but you get messed up. If you get told that you're useless, you're stupid, and if you got told for many times, you will actually start to believe, say, okay, no one else is going to love me. So if I leave this situation, what am I going to do? And I really urge you to educate yourself about the stats in your cities, in your schools, and for the youth, for your own children. I hope that one day we'll have a world free of exploitation and abuse. Our children will be free, but only through you educate yourself for prevention. Only through that I would love you to, if you're local, to volunteer with our organization. But if you're not, go volunteer with the organizations that you are with, that is local, because everyone plays a huge role in this, and we cannot fight this alone. It takes an army. And thank you so much, all.
Thank you, Eileen. That was so inspiring. And thank you for sharing those resources. While we're on the topic of advocacy, I wanted to close out by asking and talking about allyship. I think, at least in my experience, when it comes to gender-based violence and women's rights, I think sometimes the onus to fix it often falls on women and female identifying persons. And so I wanted to talk about how we can engage men and boys in advocating against human trafficking and gender-based violence.
Yeah, Ray, I can start with that. Since I am a man and I have lots of experience with myself gaining a deeper understanding of these issues throughout my life, and having appreciation for the challenges that people face in these instances. And I think that the one thing we talked about is the education piece, and it's absolutely critical to make sure that people understand that this exists. I know that Eileen mentioned Sound of Freedom and other efforts to get that message out, but it's never too early to take young boys and girls, but let them know as soon as possible that this exists. This is something that is not just a threat, as London said, 1 in 10 victims are men, but it's a threat to all of us, and you have to be on the watch out. You have to understand it is something that exists out there, and that you need to have those conversations early with them. And I think that that's truly empowering. And if you have those conversations and say this can't happen, and you do a united campaign to bring this down and educate our young population in the USA as early as possible, it's going to make a huge difference for future generations. And then they need to continue to advocate, volunteer, get out there, like Eileen said, learn more about it, understand the issues we're facing, educate themselves, and then put themselves out there. Don't be afraid just because you're a man or a boy that you cannot support, and you cannot take the time out of your busy day to support women, to support girls, and to do that important work, because they're the solution. That's what's going to get us out of this. We've been at war constantly, and the UN's have been there to prevent conflict and violence and human rights, and it's only gotten worse. So maybe we should let women have a chance and let the girls have a chance, and you as a boy or a man can step aside, and let the next generation of women lead us out of the mess we created for them. So
this is amazing, Paul. And I wanted to add a little bit. You've covered so much, and totally, like, men and boys are also victims. And I wanted you all to know that let's stop victim blaming. Society norms said masculinity. So, just like my American friends tell me, this is just like suck it up and just move on, and as if nothing ever happened. But we are here for you, and you have the rights to really be served, to heal. Because I always tell people, like, physical wound can heal, but the mental wound will never heal. And there are days that you're going to be okay. There are days that you're not going to be okay. That's why it's so important to be survivor-centered and going back to trauma-informed again. And you're so kind, Paul, talking about, let women lead the forefront. This year, I spoke at one of the law executive conferences, and they were advocating for 30-30. And I didn't understand, I'm like, what is 30-30? They meant 30% of the law enforcement executives being women by 2030. And I really encourage that. But again, I'm all about, cross-sector and multidisciplinary collaboration. I think we all serve our roles, and we all have our expertise and strengths, and we cannot do this without the men. While it is important that we have the women leadership, we also need leaders like yourself.
And if I can add also that I have opportunities to talk with young people, young professionals often, and I'm very proud of this generation that is coming along, because this generation, to me, just is more expressive, more open, more comfortable with sharing feelings, with being vulnerable, with talking through. And I've learned a lot. And with this new generation coming along, sort of breaking those kind of barriers, it almost makes it a bit easier for me and my generation, Gen X, to kind of, let our guard down a bit and be more open, and talking about feelings and, the roles that, men and women play, and how, we need to talk about, how it has expanded, how we have expanded, how we have grown, how we are all different, and that's okay. And also, just lastly, I just want to say, gender equality advocacy is where it's at. It's like, it's dope. Everybody should be doing it. Join the cool kids and, be a part of it, because that's being on the right side of history. So I think I just wanted to just throw that out there.
I love that. And I also just wanted to add my 2 cents that I believe that there's power in community, both for healing, but also for movement building and speaking truth to power and holding our society and our governments and institutions accountable, but also for just connecting with other people who share your similar life experience and also believe in, whatever issue that you're advocating for. So I'm proud to be a part of an organization that really, uplifts the power of community. And I'm hoping that we can better connect people to each other in the United States and beyond around this type of work. To close out, I wanted to ask the panelists if you have any final thoughts that you wanted to leave the audience with before we end the panel discussion.
Can I jump in real quick and answer that? I want to leave everyone with thinking about another aspect of SDG 10 relates to human trafficking and other forms of gender-based violence, is the economic part. and particularly when it comes to vulnerable populations. And speaking for myself as a person living with a disability, there are a billion people in the world, according to the UN, that identify with living with some form of disability. That's 15% of the human population. And in the United States, Social Security disability, the average is about $1,400 a month for those who are not able to work and they are collecting disability. Not even everybody receives that much, but with the rising cost of living, people living with disabilities are still living way below poverty level. So it's not matching up. And that creates a huge problem for women and girls living with disabilities, because living with disability, and if you're living below poverty level, you're unable to live on your own. And if you are in a home and you're being abused and you are possibly, unable to get out of that situation, part of that is going to be because of your economic situation. And so that's just one other component to consider when thinking about these issues. And I just wanted to throw that out there.
If I may, go ahead, Paul.
Well, I'm going to let you finish, Eileen, because you'll be the strongest finish of us. But and just going to institutions for SDG 16 to looking at what we can do going forward. And I would just call everyone on this panel, Ray, London, and Eileen have volunteered probably their whole lives and have dedicated themselves to this cause. So if you want to make a big difference, and Eileen had mentioned it, and I think every panelist mentioned it, is volunteer. Find an opportunity with an organization or institution locally and start learning more about it by rolling your hands up and volunteering. If you can, they're always willing to take those volunteers on. And if there's institutions within the government or you see locally that aren't pulling their weight or doing something, take it to the political leaders or run for office. Hold them accountable. Don't just sit there and let London mentioned people with disabilities not being able to find jobs. If there's not opportunities, or if they're not supporting that kind of in your area, and that's something you're passionate about, go do that. Go work for them. Go run for help, or run for that office, or be part of that campaign for someone who's going to fight for them. Don't just stand by on the side. Volunteer, do the hard work, fight, and we'll make this place better for all of us in the future. And on that, I'll leave it to Eileen.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, London and Ray. This is, as you said, this is something that we all are passionate about. I was up until 3 a.m. and I cannot sleep anymore. And I wake up in the middle of the night. I wake up in the morning. I go to bed thinking about this, because I'm like, what can we do? I wish I have more than 24 hours a day. Just 2 weeks ago, UNODC posted a post regarding we've only got 7 years left to the SDG goals, and how can we really accomplish the goal? They're sharing the stats that from 2014 to 2021, the number of child victims of trafficking has increased from 28% to 35%. That is a 7% increase. And I'm just gonna leave it over there to have you think, and just sit down for a minute and just think. And I'm talking about percentage and multiply by the number of people in this world. And what does that mean to you? And is it going to be the word that your children are going to be having to worry about where about they're going and have to watch their back, or you cannot just leave them at school when you go to work and think, what's going to happen to my children? And Paul has mentioned earlier about the funding, and London has mentioned about the funding and the poverty level and related to disability, everything. And I must say that the reason why I chose to represent SDG 16 is because of the partnership and the strong institution. Because we must, and I cannot emphasize enough that we need to join our forces together. For example, like, if for those of you work, several of us, we all have somehow related to the nonprofit. We are really at the mercy of grant funding, at the mercy of individual donors. And in my situation, sometimes I pay out of my pocket and I tell you I don't draw a salary, and it's not about me. But my goal is by 2028 to at least build the first shelter and not gonna be the last one, and going to build around the country and eventually around the world. So what does it look like for you to get involved? What, it depends on, everyone's different. If you have the resources to volunteer, do it. If you're a doctor, volunteer and, give the free medical care to our victims. And if you have houses that you can house our victims, because one of the many reasons they don't escape is because they got no financial resources to go, and that is why it's so essential about housing, and we want to build the shelters, then provide that. But if you have the financial resources, support us, because every penny goes towards the shelter funding, every penny goes toward whoever and whatever nonprofit organization you're supporting. And on the high level, UN is doing great job, and I urge you to support that the US support the funding for the UN so that we can continue to do the work for peacekeeping as well as the safety for our children. And thank you all.
So wonderfully said. Well, thank you again to London, Eileen, Paul, for all of your insights and all of your knowledge. We covered a wide-ranging variety of topics today, which kind of shows the intersectionality of the SDGs and how these topics intersect with human trafficking and gender-based violence. So thank you again for your time and for speaking with all of us today.